Jordan Carter exhaled deeply, savoring the warm summer air as he locked the pool gate behind him. The water shimmered under the glow of the patio lights, casting gentle ripples across the surface. It was nights like this that reminded him why he had worked so hard to buy this house. A home of his own in a quiet, upscale neighborhood, his personal retreat from the chaos of the world. But the peace didn't last long. The sharp sound of heels clicking against the pavement cut through the stillness. Jordan turned just as a figure emerged from the shadows, striding toward him with an air of self-importance. He recognized her instantly. Karen Whitmore. The self-proclaimed neighborhood watch, always peering through blinds, always inserting herself where she wasn't needed. He had seen her before, but they had never spoken. Until now. "What do you think you're doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusing. Jordan blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Karen folded her arms, her expression hard. "This pool isn't for you. It's for residents only." Jordan let out a slow breath, already feeling the heat rise in his chest. "I am a resident," he said evenly. "This is my house. My pool. I was just closing up for the night." Karen narrowed her eyes, studying him like she was trying to catch him in a lie. "I've lived here for 10 years, and I've never seen you before. You need to leave before I call the police." He chuckled dryly, more out of disbelief than amusement. "Lady, this pool is on my property. I'm not going anywhere." Karen's face twisted with indignation. "I don't know who you think you are," she snapped, pulling out her phone, "but I'm calling 911. You can explain yourself to the police." Jordan sighed, shaking his head. This was ridiculous. He had heard stories about neighbors like her, power-hungry, entitled, eager to exert control where they had none. But he had never expected to become her target. As she spoke to the dispatcher, her voice dramatically shifted into full-on victim mode. "Yes, I'm at the community pool, and there's a suspicious man refusing to leave. He's acting aggressively. Please send someone immediately." Jordan crossed his arms and leaned against the fence, watching her performance. A flicker of anger simmered beneath his calm exterior, but he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights lit up the quiet street. A squad car pulled up, and 2 officers stepped out, their expressions serious. Karen greeted them with exaggerated relief. "Thank God you're here," she gushed, clutching her chest like she had just narrowly escaped danger. "This man, he was refusing to leave when I asked him. He got hostile with me. I was so scared." One of the officers turned to Jordan. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" Without a word, Jordan pulled out his ID and property documents, handing them over. "This is my house. My pool. She's the one trespassing and harassing me." The officer examined the papers while his partner glanced over at Karen, her confident smirk starting to falter. After a moment, the officer nodded. "Looks like everything checks out," he said, handing the documents back to Jordan. Karen's eyes widened in shock. That can't be right," she stammered. "Check his background. I'm sure you'll find something." The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions shifting from serious to mildly annoyed. One of them turned to Karen, his voice firm. "Ma'am, he's the property owner. There's no crime here. If you continue to harass him, we'll have to file a report against you." Karen's face burned red, her mouth opening and closing as if she were grasping for an argument that no longer existed. She clenched her jaw, glaring at Jordan with pure hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed under her breath before storming off into the night. Jordan watched her retreat, shaking his head. "Wow," he muttered under his breath. "Guess I've officially made it as a homeowner." But as the police drove away and the street fell quiet again, a nagging thought lingered in the back of his mind. This wasn't a one-time incident. There was something deeper going on with Karen, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she wouldn't let this go. He decided then and there that he wasn't going to be her victim. If she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. And what Jordan was about to uncover about Karen would turn her world upside down. The next morning, Jordan sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone as steam curled from his untouched coffee. The events of the previous night played over in his mind like a bad dream. Karen had called the cops on him, in his own home, and even when proven wrong, she refused to admit defeat. Most people would have walked away embarrassed, maybe even apologized. But not Karen. The way she had glared at him before storming off made one thing crystal clear: this wasn't over. He wasn't about to sit around waiting for her next move. He pulled out his laptop and dialed a number. Ethan Brooks speaking. Jordan smirked at the familiar voice. Got a minute? I need some help digging up dirt on a certain neighbor. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Let me guess, Karen. Jordan leaned back in his chair. That obvious? You're not the first person to call me about a power-hungry HOA president with a superiority complex. Give me a few hours. If there's anything shady about her, I'll find it. By noon, Ethan called back, his tone sharper than before. You're not going to believe this. Jordan sat up, his grip tightening on his mug. Hit me. Karen has a pattern, Jordan. She's been kicked out of 2 previous neighborhoods before moving here. Both times, she harassed homeowners, filed false reports, and tried to use the HOA to control everything. It got so bad that entire communities turned against her. Jordan's stomach twisted. So this isn't just about me? Oh no, it's much worse. In her last neighborhood, she called the police on a teenage boy for lurking near her house. Turned out, he lived next door and was just walking home from school. The kid's parents almost sued. Before that, she accused a retired veteran of stealing her mail. She's been weaponizing authority for years. Jordan ran a hand down his face, exhaling slowly. Jesus. And nobody stopped her? She's good at playing the victim. She manipulates the system, makes herself look like the concerned citizen, and frames others as the problem. But this time, she picked the wrong guy. Jordan smirked. Damn right she did. That evening, he showed up at the HOA meeting, taking a seat near the back. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as residents glanced toward Karen, who sat confidently near the front, flipping through some papers. She was in her element, acting like she owned the room. When the floor opened for community concerns, Jordan stood. I have something I'd like to share. All eyes turned to him. Karen's expression didn't change, but her grip on the papers tightened ever so slightly. Jordan took his time, letting the silence settle before he spoke. Last night, Karen called the police on me while I was closing my own pool. She accused me of trespassing, on my own property. The room buzzed with murmurs. A few neighbors exchanged knowing glances. Karen leaned back in her chair, her lips curving into a condescending smile. I was looking out for the community. You can never be too careful these days. Jordan tilted his head. Funny, because after last night, I did some digging. And what I found was, well, let's just say it paints a very different picture. He pulled out a stack of papers, the records Ethan had sent him. Karen has a history of filing false complaints. She's done this before. In her last 2 neighborhoods, she called the cops on innocent people, accused kids of theft, and harassed homeowners to the point where she was forced out. Karen's smile faltered. That's not true. Jordan shrugged. It's all public record. Anyone here can look it up themselves. Shall I pass these around? The HOA president, an older man named Walter Henderson, took the documents first. As he read, his face darkened. Karen, this is serious. You never disclosed any of this when you moved in. Whispers filled the room. An elderly man in the back spoke up. Now that you mention it, Karen accused my grandson of stealing her garden gnome last year. She called the cops on him. A woman near the front added, she called animal control on me, saying my dog was aggressive. I own a Chihuahua. The floodgates opened. One after another, neighbors came forward with their own horror stories, harassment, complaints, intimidation. Karen's face turned ghost white. Walter looked at her, his expression unreadable. Karen, is there anything you'd like to say? For the first time, Karen seemed at a loss for words. She swallowed hard, glancing around the room as her grip on control slipped through her fingers. Jordan folded his arms, watching her squirm. And yet, he could tell. She wasn't done. Not yet. Jordan knew Karen wouldn't back down. People like her never did. The HOA meeting had shaken her, but it wasn't enough. The way she had stiffened, the way her jaw had locked when the neighbors turned on her, it wasn't fear. It was anger. She had spent years controlling everything and everyone around her, and now, she was losing her grip. But Jordan had the distinct feeling that she wasn't going to just accept defeat. He was right. The first sign of escalation came a few days later in the form of an official letter from the county. Jordan pulled it from his mailbox, frowning as he scanned the contents. It was a notice stating that his homeownership was under review due to a formal complaint regarding potential fraud in his property purchase. His blood ran cold. The letter claimed that an anonymous source had provided information suggesting that Jordan's purchase of the home was irregular and required further investigation. The implications were clear: if the claim was upheld, his ownership could be challenged, or worse, nullified. Jordan clenched the letter in his fist, already knowing exactly who was behind it. Karen was trying to have him evicted. It was a new level of low, even for her. She wasn't just trying to make his life difficult. She was trying to erase him. That night, he called Ethan. She's insane, Jordan growled, pacing his kitchen. She's actually trying to get the county to strip my home from me. Ethan sighed on the other end. I had a feeling she'd escalate. Good news is, this isn't something she can just pull off. Property ownership isn't voided because of some HOA lunatic's complaint. But it's going to be a bureaucratic nightmare to fight. Jordan exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. I need to know how she pulled this off. She's got someone in the county listening to her. I'll dig, Ethan promised. But you need to be ready, man. She's losing control, and that makes her dangerous. Jordan already knew that. 2 days later, he found his water shut off. At first, he assumed it was a mistake, some kind of billing issue. But when he called the city, the response made his stomach tighten. We received a request to close your account due to vacancy, the clerk told him. Your property is listed as abandoned. Jordan's grip tightened on the phone. Excuse me? I live here. I understand, sir, the clerk replied, but we received an official vacancy request under your name. It didn't stop there. The next morning, his electricity was cut off. His mail stopped being delivered. His address was marked as inactive in the postal system, meaning all his packages were being returned to sender. It was sabotage. Karen had systematically gone through every utility in city service she could, filing false reports to cut him off from essential services. Jordan had had enough. That evening, he confronted the HOA board directly. Walter Henderson, the HOA president, listened as Jordan laid out the fraudulent reports, the utility cutoffs, and the ownership challenge. I'm not asking for favors, Jordan finished, his voice low and controlled. I'm asking for accountability. Karen is using the HOA as a personal weapon. This isn't about property values. This is harassment. Walter's expression was unreadable as he leaned back in his chair. "I'll look into it," he said finally. That wasn't good enough. Jordan went public. He contacted a local journalist, providing them with all the evidence, the fraudulent complaints, the utility sabotage, and the proof of Karen's history of false accusations. The story exploded. HOA president accused of harassment and attempted eviction of homeowner. Karen's name was everywhere. But Jordan wasn't prepared for what happened next. One evening, as he was locking up for the night, he heard the distinct buzz of a drone. His head snapped up just in time to see a camera-equipped drone hovering above his backyard. Someone was spying on him. And he had a damn good idea who it was. Jordan didn't hesitate. His patience had worn thin, and if Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. He pulled out his phone and recorded the drone circling his property, making sure to capture its movement and the direction it returned to when it flew off, right toward Karen's house. The next morning, he filed a formal police report for harassment, citing illegal surveillance and privacy violations. He sent the footage to Ethan, who confirmed that this wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. Karen had crossed into criminal territory. But Karen wasn't done yet. That afternoon, as Jordan left his driveway, he noticed 2 police cruisers parked outside his house. His stomach dropped. He hadn't called them, so that meant someone else had. Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, her expression smug. The officers approached Jordan as he stepped out of his truck. "We received a report of an altercation that took place on this property," one of them said. "Your neighbor claims there was a violent incident." Jordan's eyes narrowed. "An altercation? I just got home." One officer glanced at Karen, who put on the performance of her life. Her voice shook as she spoke, her hands wringing together as if she had just escaped danger. "He was yelling at me earlier," she stammered. I tried to de-escalate, but he got aggressive. I was so scared." Jordan had to physically restrain himself from laughing. He turned to the officers. "Check my security footage. Every inch of my property is recorded. You'll see I was nowhere near her." Karen's face drained of color. The officers reviewed the footage, and within minutes, they realized Karen had fabricated the entire event. The shift was immediate. One officer turned back to her, arms crossed. "Ma'am, do you understand that filing a false police report is a crime?" Karen's confidence cracked, but she doubled down. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe," she sputtered. He's dangerous. You don't understand what kind of man he is." The officer shook his head. "That's enough. If we get another false call from you, there will be legal consequences." Karen's mouth opened, then shut. Jordan folded his arms, watching as her world started to crumble. The next day, it got worse. The local news ran a follow-up piece to their initial HOA harassment story. This time, they had a clip from Jordan's security footage showing Karen fabricating an altercation. It went viral overnight. Social media exploded with posts mocking her dramatic attempt at playing the victim. #Karen Whitmore Exposed began trending, and soon, memes flooded the internet. Jordan wasn't even the one fueling it, the entire town had turned against her. But the biggest blow came when HOA President Walter Henderson officially removed Karen from her position. In an emergency board meeting, Walter laid out every major complaint, every falsified report, and every abuse of power. The room wasn't just filled with HOA members, it was packed with furious homeowners who had finally had enough. Walter exhaled, rubbing his temple as he read from a prepared statement. As of today, Karen Whitmore is officially stripped of all HOA responsibilities and is prohibited from speaking on behalf of the association. Karen shot up from her seat. "You can't do this." Walter didn't even look at her. "Karen, you did this to yourself." The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her. She was finished. And yet, she still refused to admit defeat. 2 days later, Jordan was leaving his house when he noticed something new in his front yard, a for sale sign. He froze. The sign had been planted right in front of his property, bold letters reading, "Under negotiation, coming soon to a new development." Jordan's head snapped toward Karen's house. She stood in her yard, arms crossed, smirking. She had nothing left, no HOA power, no credibility, but she still wanted to take him down. But this time, Jordan didn't get mad. He laughed. Because he had one final card to play. That afternoon, Ethan delivered the news Karen never saw coming. "I pulled county records," Ethan said, sliding a document across the table. "Karen's house is in foreclosure. She's been behind on property taxes for years." Jordan let out a low whistle. "That explains a lot," he murmured. Karen hadn't been protecting property values. She hadn't been trying to keep the neighborhood safe. She had been desperately clinging to control because she was losing everything. And now, she had nothing left. The for sale sign in Jordan's yard didn't last long. Less than an hour after he saw it, he walked over, yanked it from the ground, and tossed it into his garage like the trash it was. Karen had lost everything, her HOA power, her influence, her credibility, but she still couldn't accept defeat. She had spent so much time controlling others that she had never stopped to realize her own life was crumbling. Within days, the rumors started circulating. Karen was leaving. Some said she had been forced out after her humiliating public exposure. Others claimed she was drowning in lawsuits from neighbors who had finally fought back. The truth? It was simpler than that. She was broke. Her house was in foreclosure, her financial debts catching up with her after years of trying to dictate how others lived while she could barely hold on to her own property. And then, in the most unexpected twist of all, Jordan received a letter. It was from Karen's attorney. Karen was selling her house, but instead of putting it on the open market, she was offering it to him. "For all our differences," the letter read, "I'd rather the house go to someone like you. Maybe this is my way of making amends." Jordan didn't know if it was genuine regret or just one final attempt at controlling how the story ended. Either way, he didn't care. He bought the house, not for revenge, not to gloat, but to turn it into something positive. He renovated it and rented it out to a family who actually deserved to be part of the neighborhood. Karen, meanwhile, vanished. No grand exit. No final attempt to regain control. She packed up her things, loaded them into a moving truck, and drove away, a cautionary tale of what happens when you spend your life trying to destroy others instead of fixing yourself. The neighborhood thrived without her. People were happier, friendlier. The HOA, under new leadership, actually worked with homeowners instead of against them. Months later, at a block party celebrating the new sense of peace, Jordan's friend Ethan raised a glass. To Jordan, he said, smirking. "The man who survived the HOA war and took down the Queen of Chaos." Laughter erupted, but Jordan just smiled. He didn't need a toast. He had won in the best way possible, by living well, while Karen faded into irrelevance. As the party wound down, a moving truck pulled up next door. The new homeowners stepped out, introducing themselves. Their young son, holding a small shovel, looked up at Jordan with excitement. "Can I help shovel the driveway?" Jordan chuckled, shaking his head. "Be careful, kid. Around here, shoveling can get you into trouble." The neighborhood roared with laughter. And just like that, the chapter on Karen Whitmore was finally closed. But it leaves one question: have you ever had to deal with an HOA nightmare or a Karen in power? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.